I'm Stella. I'm 62 years old. And at Christmas dinner this year, my own daughter, my only child, the girl I gave everything to, mocked me in front of her in-laws for being a widow. She said it loud enough for the whole table to hear. Loud enough for them to laugh. Loud enough to make sure I knew exactly how small she wanted me to feel. But what she didn't expect was what I said next. Before I tell you what happened, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Because this story is about every widow who's been made to feel like her grief is an inconvenience. Every mother who's been pushed aside by the child she raised. Every woman who's been told to just move on, as if love has an expiration date. The drive to my daughter's house that Christmas Eve was 43 minutes of dread wrapped in forced hope. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, and I kept telling myself that this year would be different. That maybe, just maybe, Joan would look at me the way she used to. The way she did before Richard died. Before I became this thing she's embarrassed by. This burden. This sad, pathetic woman who can't seem to pull herself together. It had been 3 years since I lost my husband. 3 years since the man I loved for 34 years had a massive heart attack in our kitchen while making his Sunday morning pancakes. 3 years since I found him on the floor, the spatula still in his hand, the smell of burning batter filling the air. 3 years since my entire world collapsed into a black hole of grief so deep I didn't think I'd ever climb out. And for 3 years, my daughter has treated me like I'm an embarrassment. The house was decorated like something out of a magazine. Joan always did have an expensive taste that my husband and I funded, by the way, though she seems to have conveniently forgotten that. White lights dripped from every eave. A wreath the size of a tire hung on the front door, probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Through the front window, I could see the chandelier sparkling over what I knew would be a perfectly set table. Everything in its place. Everything is beautiful and controlled. Everything except me. I sat in my car for 5 full minutes before I could make myself go in. My hands were shaking. I'd worn my best dress, the navy one with the pearl buttons that Richard always said made my eyes look bright. I'd done my makeup carefully, covering the dark circles that have become permanent fixtures under my eyes. I'd even gone to the salon to have my hair done, spending money I probably shouldn't have spent, just so Joan wouldn't have another reason to look at me with that expression. That mixture of pity and disgust that mothers should never have to see on their children's faces. When I finally walked up to that door, bag of carefully chosen gifts in hand, I could already feel it. That tightness in my chest. That certainty that I didn't belong here. That I was about to spend the next 4 hours being tolerated rather than welcomed. Joan's mother-in-law, Patricia, answered the door. Not Joan. Patricia. That told me everything I needed to know right there. Patricia with her perfect blonde bob that's definitely dyed but she'll never admit it. Patricia in her cream cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my car payment. Patricia with that smile that doesn't reach her eyes, that smile that says I'm being polite because I have to be, not because I want to be. Stella, she said, and I swear there was a pause before my name, like she had to remind herself what it was. Do come in. Joan's just finishing up in the kitchen. The house was full of people I barely knew. Joan's husband, Carter, and his entire family. His parents, Patricia and Donald. His sister, Veronica, with her husband and their 2 perfect children who never seemed to have runny noses or stained clothes. Carter's brother, Trevor, who works in finance and makes sure everyone knows it. All of them dressed like they were about to pose for a Christmas card. All of them looked at me like I was a smudge on their perfect holiday tableau. I could feel their eyes on me as I came in. Assessing. Judging. Taking in my department store dress, my sensible shoes, my silver hair that's thinning at the crown, another gift from grief that nobody tells you about. I could practically hear their thoughts. That's Joan's mother? The widow? Poor Joan, having to deal with that. The dining room table was set for 12. 12 place settings of fine china I know Joan registered for, and we bought her 12 crystal glasses catching the light from that ostentatious chandelier. 12 linen napkins folded into some complicated shape that probably required a YouTube tutorial. And there, at the far end of the table, was my seat. The one next to the empty chair. The empty chair. Do you know what it's like to walk into a room full of married couples when you're alone? When the person who was supposed to be beside you for the rest of your life is just gone? It's like being a puzzle piece that doesn't fit anymore. Everyone else clicks together in their neat little pairs, and you're just this jagged edge that reminds everyone that sometimes the picture gets destroyed. Sometimes the pieces get lost. Sometimes the game ends before you're ready. I sat down in my assigned seat, next to the emptiness where Richard should have been. Where he would have been, if the universe had any sense of fairness. He would have worn his good suit, the charcoal one. He would have made some dad joke that would have made Joan roll her eyes but smile despite herself. He would have asked Carter about his job and actually listened to the answer. He would have played with the grandchildren and let them climb on him like a jungle gym. He would have held my hand under the table when things got uncomfortable, given it that little squeeze that meant we're in this together. But he wasn't there. And I was alone. Surrounded by people, drowning in noise and laughter and the clink of glasses, and completely, utterly alone. You need to understand, it wasn't always like this. Joan used to be my best friend. My little girl who would climb into my lap and tell me all her secrets. My teenager who would roll her eyes at my advice but take it anyway. My young woman who called me first when she got engaged, crying happy tears, saying, "Mom, I can't wait for you to help me plan this." But then Richard died. And something shifted. Something broke between us that I don't know how to fix. At first, I thought she was just processing her own grief. Her father had died suddenly, traumatically. She had every right to fall apart. But instead of falling apart together, instead of holding each other up the way mothers and daughters are supposed to do, she pulled away. She pulled away so far and so fast that I got whiplash trying to hold on. The calls became less frequent. The visits became obligatory. And when we did talk, when we did see each other, I could feel her impatience with me. With my tears. With my stories about her father. With my inability to just bounce back and be the cheerful, helpful mother she wanted me to be. "Mom, it's been 6 months," she said once, about half a year after the funeral. "Don't you think it's time to start moving forward?" 6 months. As if grief operates on a schedule. As if love can be packed away after half a year like Christmas decorations. As if 34 years of marriage can be processed and filed away in 180 days. "Mom, you're being clingy," she said another time, when I'd called her 3 days in a row because loneliness was eating me alive. Because I'd wake up at 2 in the morning reaching for Richard and find nothing but cold sheets and crushing reality. Clingy. My daughter called me clingy for needing her after my husband died. And then came the jokes. Little ones at first. Subtle enough that I could pretend I didn't hear them, or that maybe I was being too sensitive. But they grew sharper. More pointed. More deliberate. "Mom's having a moment," she'd say when I teared up looking at family photos. "Don't mind her, she gets emotional. We can't talk about anything fun around Mom anymore," she'd sigh to Carter when I mentioned missing her father during a conversation about vacation planning. "Everything circles back to Dad. Mom's still in her widow phase," she told a friend once, not realizing I could hear her from the next room. "I don't know when she's going to snap out of it." Her widow phase. Like grief is a fashion trend I'm hanging on to too long. Like mourning the love of my life is some sort of character flaw I need to overcome. And Carter's family, God, Carter's family. They picked up on Joan's cues immediately. If Joan was embarrassed by her tragic, broken mother, then they would be too. If Joan thought I was pathetic for still grieving, then they would agree. Monkey see, monkey do. Rich people following the lead of other rich people in deciding who's worthy of respect and who isn't. I became the charity case at family gatherings. The sad widow who needed to be invited out of obligation but not welcomed out of genuine warmth. Patricia would ask me how I was doing in that tone people use when they're asking but hoping you won't actually tell them. Donald would pat my shoulder awkwardly and change the subject as quickly as possible. Veronica would give me these pitying looks that made me want to scream. And through it all, my daughter, my own daughter, my flesh and blood, the girl I carried for 9 months and labored for 14 hours to bring into this world, stood by and watched. Watched them diminishes me. Watched them treated me like an inconvenience. Watched them makes me feel small and worthless and broken. And she said nothing. Did nothing. Until she started joining in. Dinner started pleasantly enough, if you can call forced pleasantness actual pleasantness. The food was catered, of course. Joan doesn't cook, never learned how despite my best efforts to teach her. That's another thing that's been outsourced, handed off to people who do it professionally while she takes the credit for hosting. We made small talk. Weather. Work. Trevor's latest financial conquest that he managed to work into the conversation within the first 5 minutes. Veronica's children's accomplishments at school, both apparently gifted, both apparently destined for greatness, both apparently perfect in every conceivable way. I smiled. I nodded. I pushed food around my plate and tried to participate when directly addressed but mostly stayed quiet. Staying quiet was safer. Staying quiet meant fewer opportunities to say the wrong thing, to show my pain, to remind everyone that I was the broken one at the table. But quiet wasn't enough for Joan. It was never enough. About halfway through the main course, after Donald had finished some long story about a business deal and Patricia had complimented the caterer's presentation for the 3rd time, Joan looked down the table at me. I saw it coming. I don't know how I knew, but I did. That look in her eye. That little smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. She'd been drinking wine steadily throughout the meal, getting bolder with each glass. You know, she said, her voice cutting through the ambient conversation, loud enough that everyone stopped and turned their attention to her. Loud enough that there was no mistaking that this was meant to be heard. Mom's been living off the tragic widow card for 3 years now. Don't mind her if she gets all maudlin. The table went still. Awkward laughter rippled around like an unwanted wave. Patricia gave a nervous titter. Donald cleared his throat. Carter looked at his plate, his jaw tight. And me? I felt my entire body go cold. The tragic widow card. As if my grief was a manipulation. As if my pain was a performance. As if I chose this. As if I wanted to be sitting at this table, at 62 years old, alone and aching, watching my daughter mock the worst thing that ever happened to me for a laugh. But she wasn't done. Oh no. Joan was just getting started. She leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine glass, that smirk fully formed now. Some people just can't move on, you know? It's actually kind of sad. Like, at some point, you have to pick yourself up and rejoin the living, right? But Mom. She trailed off with a little laugh and a shrug, as if to say, what can you do? The room shifted. The energy changed. Everyone was looking at me now. Waiting. Wondering what the tragic widow would do. Would she cry? Would she make a scene? Would she prove Joan right by being the emotional mess her daughter had painted her to be? Inside, I was dying. Again. Because it turns out you can die more than once. Your heart can shatter into new, smaller pieces you didn't even know existed. Your daughter, your baby, your little girl, the person you would have died for without a second thought, can reach inside your chest and squeeze whatever's left of your broken heart until you can't breathe. The humiliation was physical. I could feel it burning through my veins, hot and poisonous. I could feel tears gathering behind my eyes, threatening to spill over and prove her point. I could feel my hands starting to shake in my lap, hidden beneath the table where nobody could see. This was my child. My daughter. And she had just betrayed me in the cruelest way possible, in front of people I barely knew, during a holiday that was supposed to be about love and family and togetherness. For 3 years, I had swallowed her cruelty. For 3 years, I had made excuses for her behavior. She's grieving too. She's stressed with work. She's adjusting to married life. She doesn't mean it. For 3 years, I had diminished my own pain to make room for hers, had made myself smaller and smaller to fit into whatever space she was willing to give me. But sitting there, at that table, in that moment, something in me snapped. Not broke. Snapped. Like a twig under too much pressure. Like a rope pulled too tight. Like a woman who has been bent and bent and bent and finally reached her breaking point. I set down my fork. Carefully. Deliberately. The small clink of silver against china seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Everyone was still watching me. Waiting for the show. Waiting for the widow to fall apart. I took a breath. Steadied myself. Looked my daughter directly in her eyes, those eyes that used to look at me with love, with trust, with the unshakable certainty that her mother would always be her safe place. And I said, in a voice that was quiet but clear, steady but sharp, "That's interesting. Because being a widow doesn't make me weak." Joan's smirk flickered. Just slightly. Just enough for me to see the first crack in her confidence. I continued, each word chosen carefully, delivered with the precision of someone who has finally had enough, and it certainly didn't leave me alone. The room went completely silent. That kind of silence that's heavy, that presses down on you, that makes every small sound, the tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, someone's breath catching, seem impossibly loud. Joan laughed. But it was different now. Uncertain. A little defensive. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached down to the bag I'd brought with me, the one full of gifts I'd carefully chosen and wrapped for these people who clearly didn't care about me. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady. Unnaturally steady. The way your hands get when you've gone past fear and landed somewhere else entirely. Somewhere clear and cold and absolutely certain. I pulled out an envelope. Not wrapped in festive paper. Not decorated with ribbons or bows. Just a simple manila envelope, legal-sized, sealed. The kind of envelope that means business. The kind of envelope that changes things. I placed it on the table in front of me with a soft thud that somehow seemed deafening in that silent room. Everyone stared at it. Then at me. Then back at the envelope. Joan's smile had completely vanished now. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide. "Mom, what is that?" Patricia leaned forward slightly, her polished facade cracking just enough to show genuine curiosity. Donald adjusted his glasses. Carter set down his fork, his full attention now on me instead of his plate. Even the children sensed something important was happening and went quiet, watching the adults with wide eyes. I smoothed my hand over the envelope. Let the moment stretch. Let them wonder. Let my daughter feel a fraction of the uncertainty and fear she'd been making me feel for 3 years. "This," I said quietly, "is something your father left for me. Something I haven't told anyone about because I didn't think I needed to. Because I didn't think my own daughter would mock me for grieving the man who loved me more than anything in this world. The man who made sure, even in death, that I would be taken care of." Joan's throat worked as she swallowed hard. "Mom. No, I cut her off, my voice sharper now, louder. 3 years of swallowed words, 3 years of accepted humiliation, 3 years of being made to feel small all came pouring out in that single syllable. No, you don't get to mom me right now. You don't get to act concerned or confused. You wanted to mock the tragic widow? Fine. But let me tell you what this widow actually is. I opened the envelope. Slowly. Deliberately. Making them wait. Making her wait. Inside were documents. Legal documents. Documents I'd been carrying with me lately, not because I'd planned this confrontation, I hadn't, but because I'd been meeting with lawyers and financial advisors, trying to understand everything Richard had left for me. Trying to navigate a world of estates and trusts and investments that he'd always handled because that was his domain, that was his way of taking care of us. I pulled out the first document. This is the deed to the lake house. The one we bought 20 years ago, the one where you spent every summer growing up, the one where you got engaged on the dock at sunset. It's in my name. Fully paid off. Worth approximately $1.2 million in the current market. I heard Patricia inhale sharply. Saw Donald's eyebrows shoot up. Watched Veronica's eyes go wide. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Joan. At my daughter whose face had gone from pale to gray, whose hands were now gripping the edge of the table. I pulled out the next document. This is the investment portfolio your father built over 30 years. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds. All carefully chosen, all carefully managed. It's not a fortune, but it's substantial. Enough that I will never have to worry about money for the rest of my life. Enough that I could, if I wanted to, help my daughter buy a house bigger than this one. Or not. Depending on how that daughter treats me. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in the next county. And this, I said, pulling out the last document, the one that hurt the most to touch, the one I'd only read once before putting it away because it made me sob so hard I couldn't breathe, this is a letter. A letter your father wrote to me 6 months before he died. We'd updated our wills, and he insisted on writing this, just in case. Just in case something happened to him. My voice cracked on those last words. Just in case. As if he knew. As if some part of him sensed that his time was limited, that he needed to say things that couldn't wait. I held the letter but didn't open it. I couldn't read it aloud. Not here. Not now. Not in front of these people. But I told them what it said. In this letter, your father tells me how much he loves me. How our 34 years together were the best years of his life. How he wants me to live fully and joyfully after he's gone, but that he understands if I need time to grieve. How he's made sure I'll be financially secure because taking care of me was the greatest honor of his life. How he hopes our daughter will be strong and kind and will take care of me the way I took care of everyone else. I looked directly at Joan now, and I didn't bother hiding the tears that were streaming down my face. Your father made sure I wasn't alone, Joan. He made sure I would be secure and safe and provided for. He made sure the woman he loved for more than 3 decades wouldn't have to scramble or struggle or depend on anyone. He made sure of that because that's what real love does. It protects. It provides. It persists even after death. My voice rose, not to a shout, but to something harder, something sharp enough to cut, so no, I'm not playing the tragic widow card. I'm not weak. I'm not pathetic. I'm not some sad, broken thing you need to be embarrassed by. I'm a woman who loved deeply and was loved deeply in return. I'm a woman who lost her partner and her best friend and is doing everything she can to survive that loss. I'm a woman who sacrificed everything, to raise you, to give you opportunities, to make sure you had the best life possible. The room was frozen. Every single person sat motionless, barely breathing, watching this scene unfold. I worked 2 jobs when you were little so we could afford your dance lessons and your art classes and your tutoring. I went without new clothes so you could have the latest fashions. I drove a decade-old car so we could pay for your college without loans. Your father and I bought you this china you're eating off of, helped with the down payment on this house you're hosting Christmas in, funded the wedding where you married into this family that looks down on me. My voice broke, but I pushed through. And when your father died, when my world shattered into a million pieces, I needed you. I needed my daughter. And instead of getting my child, I got judgment. I got impatient. I got mocked. I got made to feel like my grief was an inconvenience. Like my pain was a character flaw. Like my love for your father was something to be ashamed of. Joan was crying now too, but I couldn't stop. 3 years of this had been building, and it was coming out whether I wanted it to or not. So you're right, Joan. Some people can't move on. Because some people loved so deeply that moving on feels like a betrayal. Because some people would rather be tragic widows than women who forget. Because some people know that real love doesn't have an expiration date, doesn't come with a timeline, doesn't fit into neat little boxes that make other people comfortable. Patricia's face had gone white. She looked at Donald, then at Joan, then back at the document still spread on the table in front of me. The calculation was visible in her eyes. The reassessment. The sudden realization that the sad, embarrassing widow she'd been looking down on was actually a woman of substantial means. A woman with assets. A woman with security. A woman her son's wife had been inexcusably cruel to. Donald cleared his throat, his voice uncertain. Joan, you never mentioned that your mother was, that your father had. But he couldn't finish. Because how do you finish that sentence? How do you articulate that your daughter-in-law had painted her mother as a pathetic, clinging burden when the reality was so different? Carter was staring at his wife with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disappointment, maybe. Embarrassment, certainly. He'd always been polite to me, if distant, but I wondered what he was thinking now. I wondered what it felt like to realize your wife had been systematically diminishing and mocking a woman who had more financial security than both of them combined. Veronica had her hand over her mouth, her eyes moving between me and Joan like she was watching a tennis match. Trevor looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, probably wanting to be anywhere but here. And Joan. Oh, my Joan. My daughter. My baby girl. She looked destroyed. Mom, she whispered, her voice small and broken in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. Why didn't you tell me? About the money, about the letter, about. Because I shouldn't have had to. The words exploded out of me before I could stop them. I shouldn't have had to prove my worth to you. I shouldn't have had to show you a bank statement to earn basic human respect from my own child. I thought, my voice cracked. I thought you loved me because I was your mother. Because of everything we'd been to each other. Because of all the years and all the memories and all the love. Not because of what I have or what I'm worth. The tears were flowing freely now, and I didn't care who saw. You want to know why I didn't tell you? Because even in the depths of my grief, even at my absolute lowest, I still believed my daughter loved me for me. I still believed that when I needed you, you would be there. Not because I had money. Not because I had property. But because I'm your mother and you're my daughter, and that's supposed to mean something. Joan reached across the table toward me, her own tears making tracks through her carefully applied makeup. Mom, please. But I was already standing, gathering the documents, putting them back in the envelope with shaking hands. Patricia found her voice, and oh, the tone had changed. The condescension was gone, replaced with something that might have been respected if it wasn't so obviously motivated by the wrong reasons. Stella, please don't go. There's been a misunderstanding. Joan didn't mean. Yes, she did. I cut her off, and my voice is tired now. I'm so tired. She meant every word. Every joke. Every dismissal. Every time she made me feel small and broken and less than. She meant it all. And you, I looked around the table at these people who'd treated me like a burden, like an embarrassment, like something to be tolerated rather than welcomed. You all let her. You all participated. You all made me feel like my grief was inappropriate, like my loss was something I should get over for your comfort. I picked up my bag, leaving the wrapped gifts on the side table. Let them have them or not. I didn't care anymore. I may be a widow, I said, and my voice was steady now, clear and strong despite the tears. But I am not alone. Your father made sure of that, Joan. He loved me enough to take care of me even after death. He thought of me, provided for me, protected me. And that, I had to pause, had to breathe through the pain that was crushing my chest. That is what love looks like. Not this. Never this. I walked toward the door, and every step felt like I was walking through water. Heavy. Difficult. But necessary. Mom. Joan was up from the table now, her chair scraping back, her voice desperate. Mom, wait. Please. I stopped at the door. Turned back. Looked at my daughter one last time. She looked young suddenly. Vulnerable. Like the little girl who used to cry when I dropped her off at preschool. Like the teenager who sobbed on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart. Like the bride who held my hands the morning of her wedding and told me she hoped she could be half the wife I'd been. I love you, Joan, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I meant it. I will always love you. You're my daughter. But I can't do this anymore. I can't keep shrinking myself to fit into the space you're willing to give me. I can't keep swallowing my pain to make you comfortable. I can't keep being less so you can feel like more. Mom, please, I'm sorry. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask, I said quietly. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. Because it was easier to make me the problem than to deal with your own feelings about your father's death. Because mocking me was simpler than mourning with me. Carter had come up behind her now, his hand on her shoulder, and I saw something in his face that might have been shame. Good. Let him feel it. Let him understand what his silence had cost. I need time, I told Joan. I need space. I need to figure out who I am without your father and without your judgment. And you, my voice softened despite the pain. You need to figure out who you want to be. The kind of woman who mocks her grieving mother? Or the kind of woman your father raised you to be? Mom. But I was already opening the door. Already stepping out into the cold December night. Already leaving behind the perfect house with its perfect decorations and its perfectly awful people. The snow was falling. Soft, quiet flakes drifting down from a dark sky. It should have felt cold, stepping out into the winter night without a coat I'd forgotten in my rush to leave, but it didn't. The air felt cleaner out here. Crisper. Easier to breathe. I walked to my car, my heels clicking on the icy driveway, and I didn't look back. I didn't let myself look back. Because if I did, if I saw my daughter's face in the doorway, I might crumble. I might go back in. I might let her apologize and smooth things over and promise to do better, and we'd fall right back into the same pattern. Her treating me like an embarrassment. I accept it because at least she's in my life. But I deserve better than that. Richard would want better for me than that. Behind me, I heard the door close. Heard the muffled sound of voices inside, probably Carter's family dissecting what had just happened, probably Joan crying, probably Patricia and Donald having urgent whispered conversations about how they'd completely misjudged the situation. I got in my car. Started the engine. Sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, exactly like I'd sat there when I arrived, but everything was different now. I was different now. My phone buzzed. A text from Joan: "Mom, please come back inside. We need to talk. I'm so sorry. Please." I looked at it for a long moment. Then I turned the phone face down and put the car in reverse. The drive home was quiet. The Christmas carols on the radio felt obscene, all that joy and celebration when I felt like I'd just had my heart ripped out all over again. I turned the radio off. Drove in silence through streets decorated with lights and wreaths and inflatable snowmen. Drove past houses full of families, warm and together, celebrating the holiday the way it's supposed to be celebrated. I thought about Richard. About how he would have handled tonight. He probably would have stood up the moment Joan made that first joke, would have said something firm but kind, would have made it clear that disrespecting me wasn't acceptable. He always protected me like that. Always made me feel safe and valued and cherished. God, I missed him. Missed him with an ache that was physical, that lived in my bones, that woke me up at night and followed me through every day. 3 years, and missing him hadn't gotten easier. It had just gotten different. Less acute, maybe, but deeper. More permanent. I pulled into my driveway, the driveway of the house Richard and I bought when Joan was 5, the house where we'd raised her, the house that was now too big and too empty and too full of memories. I sat in the car for a while, letting the engine run, letting the heat blow on my cold face, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. I'd walked away from my daughter on Christmas Eve. I'd left her crying in that perfect house surrounded by her perfect in-laws. I'd exposed her cruelty, her shallowness, her ingratitude in front of everyone. And I didn't feel good about it. That's the thing nobody tells you about standing up for yourself. It doesn't feel triumphant. It feels awful. It feels like a loss. Because even when you're right, even when you're justified, you're still losing something. You're still watching a relationship you treasured crack and possibly break beyond repair. But I couldn't keep doing it. Couldn't keep being small for her comfort. Couldn't keep pretending that her cruelty was acceptable, that my pain was invalid, that a mother should just accept whatever scraps of affection her child deigns to throw her way. Richard wouldn't have wanted that for me. In that letter, the one I couldn't read aloud, the one that was too precious and too painful to share, he'd written, "Stella, my love, my heart, my home. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're alone, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't keep my promise to grow old with you. But please, my darling, don't let anyone make you feel small. Don't let anyone, not even our daughter, especially not our daughter, treat you as less than the extraordinary woman you are. You gave everything to our family, sacrificed everything for us, and you deserve to be honored for that. You deserve to be cherished. And if anyone, makes you feel otherwise, walk away. You have the means to live well, to be independent, to choose who gets the gift of your presence. Choose wisely. Choose people who treasure you the way I treasured you. Choose yourself. Choose yourself." I finally turned off the car. Went inside. The house was dark and quiet, the way it always was now. No Richard calling out "How'd it go?" from his armchair. No sounds of him puttering in his workshop or humming along to his favorite records. Just silence. Just emptiness. Just me. I hung up my coat. Kicked off my heels. Walked through the house turning on lights, trying to push back the darkness and the cold and the overwhelming loneliness. But here's the thing, and maybe this makes me pathetic, maybe this proves Joan right, the loneliness in my own home felt better than the loneliness I'd felt at that dinner table. At least here, in this house full of memories and grief, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to smile through humiliation. I didn't have to make myself small. I made myself a cup of tea. Richard's favorite kind, Earl Grey, that I still buy even though I'm the only one drinking it now. I sat in his chair, my chair now, I guess, though it will always be his in my heart. I looked at the Christmas tree we'd put up together 23 times before this one. The tree I'd put up alone this year, crying through half of it, decorating it with ornaments that told the story of our life together. And I let myself feel it. All of it. The grief over Richard. The grief over Joan. The exhaustion of 3 years of trying to be enough for a daughter who'd decided I was too much. The relief of finally standing up for myself. The fear that I'd just destroyed my relationship with my only child. The hope, small and fragile but real, that maybe, somehow, this could be a turning point. My phone kept buzzing. Messages from Joan, each one more desperate than the last. "Mom, please answer me. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. Carter is furious with me. His parents won't stop talking about how awful I was. Please, Mom. I can't lose you too." That last one almost broke me. Almost. Because that's what she does, what she's always done since Richard died. She makes it about her loss, her pain, her needs. As if losing her father erased my right to grieve losing my husband. As if her orphaning somehow trumped my widowing. I turned the phone off. Not just silent. Off. Completely off. Because I needed this night. I needed the silence. I needed to sit in my dead husband's chair and drink his favorite tea and not have to manage anyone else's emotions or comfort anyone else's guilt. The house settled around me with its familiar creaks and sighs. The furnace kicked on. The refrigerator hummed. The old grandfather clock in the hallway, the one Richard inherited from his father, ticked steadily, marking time that moved forward whether I was ready or not. I thought about that envelope. About those documents I'd carried like a shield, like proof of my worth, like evidence that I mattered. And I felt sick. Sick that I'd needed them. Sick that my daughter had pushed me to a point where I felt I had to prove my value with bank statements and property deeds. Sick that money, had been what finally made those people respect me, when 3 years of quiet dignity and graceful grief apparently hadn't been enough. Richard and I had never been wealthy. We'd been comfortable. We'd worked hard, saved carefully, made smart decisions. We'd lived below our means so we could give Joan more. So we could retire with security. So we could help our grandchildren someday, buy them the things their parents couldn't afford, be the grandparents who could say yes when mom and dad had to say no. But we'd never flaunted it. Never made our worth about our net worth. We'd measured our life in love, in time spent together, in memories made. The lake house wasn't an investment property, it was where we'd taught Joan to swim, where we'd watched sunsets from the dock, where Richard proposed to me on our 10th anniversary, getting down on one knee all over again and asking if I'd spend another 10 years with him. The answer was yes. Always yes. I'd have said yes to 100 more years if God had given them to us. And now those things, those precious things that represented love and life and family, had become weapons. Had become the price of my daughter's respect. Had become what I needed to make people see me as something other than pathetic. I cried. Sitting there in Richard's chair, drinking his tea, surrounded by our life together, I cried. Not the pretty crying you see in movies. The ugly kind. The kind that comes from somewhere so deep you didn't know you had depths like that. The kind that shakes your whole body and makes sounds that don't seem human. The kind that leaves you exhausted and hollow and somehow still full of pain. I must have fallen asleep in the chair eventually, because I woke up to thin winter sunlight streaming through the windows and my neck was cramped from an awkward angle. Christmas morning. The day Richard and I used to wake up early, make cinnamon rolls from scratch, watch Joan tear through presents like a tiny tornado of joy. The day that was supposed to be about love and family and magic. My phone was still off. I left it that way. Made coffee. Sat at the kitchen table where Richard died, because avoiding it hadn't made it less real in 3 years, and it wouldn't start now. Looked at the wrapped presents I'd bought for myself and put under the tree, a ritual Richard had insisted on even when Joan was grown and gone, because everyone deserves presents on Christmas morning, Ellie. I should have felt lonely. Should have felt miserable. Should have been drowning in regret and second-guessing and the overwhelming urge to call Joan and apologize and make everything go back to normal. But I didn't. I felt quiet. Calm. Like something that had been pulled too tight for too long had finally been released. Like a breath I'd been holding for 3 years had finally been exhaled. The doorbell rang around 10 in the morning. My heart jumped. Joan, probably, came to apologize in person, to explain, to make it better or worse or something other than this strange, peaceful emptiness I was feeling. But it wasn't Joan. It was Carter. He stood on my doorstep in jeans and a sweater, looking tired and uncomfortable, holding a poinsettia like a peace offering. "Stella," he said. "Can I come in?" I almost said no. Almost closed the door. But curiosity won out. Curiosity and, maybe, a tiny hope that he'd come to tell me Joan was devastated, that she realized what she'd done, that she wanted to make things right. I let him in. Made him coffee he didn't ask for but accepted anyway. We sat in the living room, me on the couch, him in the chair across from me, not Richard's chair. I wasn't ready for anyone to sit there, and for a long moment, he just looked around. "I've never actually been inside your house before," he said finally. "Joan always insisted on meeting at our place or going out. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now." He trailed off, and I could see him noticing things. The photos on every surface. Richard and me on our wedding day. Joan as a baby, as a child, as a teenager, as a bride. Family vacations. Birthdays. Ordinary moments elevated to precious by being captured and displayed. "She was ashamed," I said flatly. "Of this house that's too old, too small, too ordinary. Of me being here alone, surrounded by memories of her father. It made her uncomfortable, so she kept you away." Carter flinched but didn't deny it. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have pushed harder. Should have insisted. Should have." He rubbed his face tiredly. "There are a lot of things I should have done differently." "Did she send you?" "No." He looked up at me, and I saw something in his face I hadn't seen before. Steel. Determination. "She doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I'm playing golf with Trevor. But I needed to see you. To apologize. For my part in all of this." I sipped my coffee and waited. Let him find his words. "My parents can be difficult," he said carefully. "They have very specific ideas about how things should be. How people should be. And they're not always kind to people who don't fit their expectations." I knew that. I knew they could be judgmental and cold. But I thought Joan would. He stopped. Started again. "I thought my wife would protect you from that. Would stand up for you. Would make it clear that treating her mother with anything less than respect was unacceptable. But she didn't. No. She didn't. And God, Stella, I'm so ashamed. I'm so ashamed that I sat there, night after night, dinner after dinner, and watched them diminish you. Watched Joan join in. And I did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place, that it was between you and Joan, that I didn't want to cause problems in my marriage. But that's bullshit. That's cowardice. And I'm sorry." The apology settled between us. Not fixing anything, but at least acknowledging the break. "Last night," Carter continued, "after you left, my mother pulled Joan aside. And she told her, in front of everyone, that the way she treats you is disgraceful. That no amount of money or property makes up for losing a spouse. That grief doesn't have a timeline. That Joan should be ashamed of herself. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up. It took money for your mother to care. I know. He had the grace to look embarrassed. I know. And that's not right either. You shouldn't have had to prove anything. But Stella, what you said last night, about everything you sacrificed for Joan, everything you gave her, I don't think she ever understood. I don't think I ever understood. She didn't want to understand, I said, and my voice was harder than I intended. Understanding would have required acknowledging my pain. And my pain made her uncomfortable. So she chose to make me the problem instead. Carter nodded slowly. Joan's father died when she was 32. Successful, married, established. She lost a parent, which is terrible. But you lost your partner. Your companion. The person you built a life with. The person you woke up to every single day for 34 years. And those aren't the same thing. They're both losses, they're both griefs, but they're not the same. Tears pricked my eyes. Because finally, someone was saying it. Someone was acknowledging that my loss was different from Joan's, not less valid but different, and that different kinds of loss require different kinds of understanding. She's always been. I don't want to say selfish, Carter said carefully. But self-focused. Everything filters through how it affects her. And when Richard died, when you needed her, she couldn't see past her own grief to yours. And then, when your grief lasted longer than she thought it should, when it didn't fit into her timeline, she got, I don't know. Resentful? Impatient? She wanted her mom back, the mom who took care of everything, who was strong and capable and always okay. She didn't want to have to be the strong one. She didn't want to have to take care of you. I never asked her to take care of me, I said, and my voice broke. I just asked her to love me. To be patient with me. To let me grieve without judgment. I know. Carter set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. Stella, I don't know if this helps, but Joan didn't sleep last night. She cried for hours. She went through photo albums, old videos. She watched the recording of your speech at our wedding, where you talked about how proud you were of her, how much Richard loved her, how excited you were to welcome me into the family. And she just kept saying, how did I become this person? How did I become someone who treats my mother this way? The pain in my chest twisted sharply. Because part of me, the mother part that never stops loving, never stops hoping, wanted to go to her. Wanted to hold her while she cried. Wanted to make it better. But another part of me, the part that had been bleeding for 3 years, the part that had finally started to scab over, knew that wasn't what she needed. What we needed. Carter, I said slowly, I love my daughter. I will always love my daughter. But I can't go back to how things were. I can't keep accepting cruelty because I'm desperate for whatever scraps of her time and attention she's willing to give me. That's not love. That's not a relationship. That's me setting myself on fire to keep her warm. I'm not asking you to, he said quickly. I'm not here to pressure you or guilt you I'm just here to tell you that she knows. She knows she was wrong. She knows she hurt you. She knows she's been hurting you. And she wants, he paused. She wants to do better. If you'll give her the chance. And if I won't? The words came out sharper than I meant them. If I decide that I'm done being treated this way? If I decide that 62 is too old to keep begging for my own daughter's respect? What then? Carter looked at me with something that might have been understanding. Then that's your choice. And it's valid. And I'll make sure Joan understands that. That she doesn't get to mock you for 3 years and then expect immediate forgiveness just because she finally feels guilty. We sat in silence for a while. The clock ticked. The furnace hummed. Outside, I could hear children playing in the snow, their laughter carrying through the cold air. "Can I tell you something?" Carter said finally. "Something I've never told anyone?" I nodded. "My parents' marriage is miserable. Absolutely miserable. They stay together because of appearances, because of money, because divorce isn't what people like them do. But there's no warmth there. No affection. They sleep in separate bedrooms. They take separate vacations. They can barely stand to be in the same room together. And I grew up thinking that's what marriage was. That's what forever looked like. Cold. Transactional. Endured rather than enjoyed." He looked at the photos on my walls. "And then I met Joan. And I met you and Richard. And I saw, God, Stella, I saw what love actually looks like. I saw the way Richard looked at you like you hung the moon. The way you'd touch his hand when you passed him in the kitchen. The way you'd laugh at his terrible jokes. The way you'd finish each other's sentences. The way you were partners in everything. And I thought, that's what I want. That's what marriage should be." My throat was tight. He was my best friend. My home. My safe place. I know. I could see it. Everyone could see it. And when he died, when I saw what his loss did to you, Stella, that's love. That's what it means to love someone so much that losing them nearly destroys you. And Joan should have seen that. Should have honored that. Should have been proud that her mother loved and was loved that deeply. She saw it as weakness, I whispered. She saw it as a threat, Carter corrected gently. Because if love can be that big, if love can matter that much, then she has to question whether she and I have that. Whether we're building something real or just playing house in a pretty home with the right last name and the right zip code. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw the pain in his eyes, the doubt, the fear. "Do you love her?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "But I don't know if we have what you and Richard had. I don't know if we're building toward that or just coasting. And I think Joan doesn't know either. And seeing your grief, seeing how much you miss Richard, forces her to confront that. That's not my problem to solve." "No," he agreed. "It's not. But it's the context. It's not an excuse, but it's context." Carter left after another hour. We talked about other things, his work, Joan's job, the house they were thinking of renovating. Surface things. Safe things. But something had shifted. Some understanding had been reached, even if I wasn't sure what it was yet or what it meant. After he left, I finally turned on my phone. It exploded with messages. Not just from Joan, but from numbers I didn't recognize. I scrolled through them, my stomach sinking. "Patricia, Stella, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions that were unfair and unkind. I hope you can forgive my rudeness. Veronica, I'm so sorry for how we treated you. You didn't deserve that. None of it." Even Trevor, who I'd barely exchanged 10 words with, "Hey Stella. I've been thinking about what you said. About sacrifice and love and what matters. Made me think about my own priorities. Thank you for that." And from Joan, dozens of messages. Voice memos I couldn't bring myself to listen to. Photos of us from years ago. A long, rambling text that started with "Mom, I'm so sorry," and ended with "Please don't give up on me." I stared at that last line for a long time. Please don't give up on me. As if I was the one who'd given up. As if I was the one who'd walked away first. As if the last 3 years of trying, of calling and being ignored, of reaching out and being dismissed, of showing up and being mocked, didn't count. But maybe, in a way, she was right. Maybe I had given up. Maybe somewhere in the last 3 years, I'd stopped fighting for our relationship because fighting hurt too much. Maybe I'd let myself become small and quiet and acceptable because that was easier than standing up and demanding better. Maybe we'd both given up. Just in different ways. I thought about Richard. About what he'd want. He'd want Joan and me to find our way back to each other, I knew that without question. He'd loved her so much, been so proud of her, so hopeful for her future. But he'd also written that letter. He'd also told me to choose myself, to walk away from anyone who made me feel small, to not let even our daughter diminish me. So what did that mean? What was I supposed to do with this broken thing that used to be such a beautiful relationship? I looked at the Christmas tree. At the ornaments that told our family story. Joan's baby handprint in clay from 1993. The first Christmas ornament from when she was born. The ballerina from the year she was obsessed with dance. The graduation cap from high school. The bride and groom from her wedding year. And mixed in with hers, ornaments from Richard and my life. Our first apartment. Our 10th anniversary. The year we bought the lake house. The year I beat cancer, another story, another scar, another thing I'd survived. I was a survivor. I'd survived illness, loss, grief, betrayal. I'd survived my husband dying in my arms. I'd survived my daughter turning away when I needed her most. I'd survived 3 years of being made to feel like my pain was unacceptable. And I'd keep surviving. With or without Joan's approval. With or without Carter's family's respect. With or without anyone's validation. But God, I didn't want to survive without my daughter. I didn't want this estrangement, this cold distance, this broken thing between us. I wanted my girl back. My sweet girl who used to climb into bed with me during thunderstorms. Who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. Who used to tell me I was her best friend. Maybe she was still in there somewhere, underneath the polish and the pretense and the cruelty. Maybe Carter was right, and she was finally seeing what she'd become. Maybe last night had been the wake-up call she needed. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe she'd make excuses. Maybe she'd blame me for embarrassing her. Maybe she'd decide I was the problem after all, and this would become another story she told about her difficult mother. I couldn't control that. I couldn't control her response, her growth, her choices. I could only control mine. I picked up my phone. Started typing. Deleted it. Started again. Deleted again. Because what do you say to your daughter after a night like that? How do you bridge a gap that wide, that deep, that painful? Finally, I settled on, Joan, I love you. That hasn't changed and won't change. But I need time. I need space to figure out what our relationship looks like going forward. I need to know that you understand why what you said hurts so deeply, and that you're committed to real change, not just feeling guilty. Take the time you need to think about what kind of daughter you want to be. I'll be here when you're ready to have that conversation. But I won't be the sad, small widow you can mock anymore. If we rebuild this, we rebuild it on mutual respect. I love you. Mom. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Watched the message go through. Waited to see if she'd respond immediately. She didn't. And that was okay. That was maybe even good. Because immediate responses are often defensive responses. Thought-out responses take time. The rest of Christmas Day passed quietly. I ate leftover Chinese food from the fridge. Watched old movies. Opened my presents to myself, a new book, some fancy tea, a cashmere scarf I'd been eyeing but would never have bought myself if Richard was alive because he'd have bought it for me. Small comforts. Small luxuries. Small acknowledgements that I was worth taking care of, even if I was the one doing the caring. Joan didn't respond that day. Or the next. Or the day after that. A week passed. Then 2. I went about my life. Met with my financial advisor about the investments Richard had left me. Made plans for the lake house, maybe rent it out in summer, have it for myself in the fall. Went to my grief support group for the first time in a year because maybe I'd stopped going too soon, maybe I still needed it. And slowly, I started to feel like myself again. Not the self I was before Richard died, that woman was gone, and I'd accepted that. But not the small, diminished self I'd become either. Something new. Something different. A woman who'd been broken and was learning how to exist with the cracks, how to let light through the broken places. 3 weeks after Christmas, my doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd been making soup, Richard's recipe, the one he'd make when anyone in the family was sick or sad or just needed comfort. The smell filled the house, made it feel less empty. Joan stood on my doorstep. No poinsettia. No gifts. No props. Just her, looking tired and young and scared. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly. "Hi, baby." The endearment slipped out before I could stop it, because she's still my baby, still my girl, even when she breaks my heart. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. Let her in. Let her see the house she'd been avoiding, the home where her father and I had built a life, the place that was mine now and mine alone. She stood in the living room, looking around the same way Carter had, seeing it maybe for the first time. Really seeing it. "It smells like Dad's soup," she said, and her voice cracked. "I was making some. For me. But there's enough for 2, if you want to stay." She nodded, tears already streaming down her face. "I want to stay. If that's okay." "Come sit," I said, leading her to the kitchen. The kitchen where Richard died, which had taken me a year to use again, which had taken another year to stop seeing his body on the floor every time I walked in. "Talk to me, Joan. Really talk to me. Not apologies and guilt, but real conversation. Tell me what happened. Tell me how we got here." And she did. For 3 hours, over bowls of soup that got cold and were reheated and got cold again, she talked. She cried. She explained, not excused, but explained. How her father's death had terrified her, made her realize her parents were mortal, that loss was real and coming for all of us. How she couldn't handle seeing me broken because if I could break, then nothing was safe. How she'd chosen anger over sadness, judgment over compassion, distance over intimacy because those things felt safer than the alternative. "I was so scared," she whispered. "So scared of ending up like you. Alone and grieving and lost. So I convinced myself you were doing it wrong. That your grief was excessive, dramatic, a choice you were making. Because if it was a choice, then I could choose differently. I could choose to be fine. To move on. To not let Dad's death define me." "But it does define you," I said gently. "It defines both of us. Not in a bad way, but in a real way. Loss changes us. It's supposed to change us. The alternative is to pretend it doesn't matter, and then what was the point of all that love?" She sobbed into her hands. "I was so cruel to you. Mom, I was so unspeakably cruel. And you just took it. You kept showing up, kept calling, kept trying. Even when I made it clear I didn't want you around. Because you're my daughter. Because I love you more than I love my own pride or comfort or peace. I don't deserve that. Love isn't about deserving. You taught me that, actually. When you were 3 and having an absolute meltdown in the grocery store, hitting and screaming and being completely irrational, I just held you until you calmed down. Remember? You don't remember, but I do. And afterwards, you asked me why I wasn't mad. And I told you, because love means staying even when it's hard. Even when the person you love is being difficult. even when it would be easier to walk away. Joan looked up at me with those eyes that were suddenly 5 years old again, suddenly my little girl. I don't know how to fix this. Neither do I admitted. But maybe we figure it out together. Maybe we start over, start fresh, with honesty instead of pretense. With boundaries instead of unlimited tolerance. With mutual respect instead of me just accepting whatever you're willing to give. I want that, she said. I want to do better. I want to be the daughter Dad raised me to be. The daughter you deserve. Then let's try, I said. Not perfectly. Not all at once. But let's try. Rebuilding takes time. It's been 8 months since that Christmas dinner. 8 months of weekly lunches, of therapy sessions together and apart, of hard conversations and harder realizations. Of Joan learning to acknowledge my pain without making it about hers. Of me learning to set boundaries without guilt. Of both of us learning how to be mother and daughter in this new reality, without Richard to mediate, without the old patterns to fall back on. It's not perfect. Some days are still hard. Some days she says something thoughtless, and I have to remind her. Some days I'm too sensitive, and she has to gently push back. But we're trying. We're both trying. Carter was right, the conversation opened something in their marriage too. They're in couples counseling, figuring out what they want their relationship to be instead of just going through the motions. Joan tells me about it sometimes, carefully, and I listen without judgment because that's what she needs. Patricia still makes me uncomfortable, but she's been better. More respectful. She invited me to lunch last month, just the two of us, and apologized properly. It didn't erase the past, but it acknowledged it. That's something. And me? I'm still grieving. Still missing Richard with an ache that I think will last the rest of my life. But I'm also living. Really living, not just surviving. I've started volunteering at the community center, teaching cooking classes, Richard's recipes, shared with others who might need comfort food as much as I once did. I've joined a book club. I've started talking to a man named Tom, whose wife died 2 years ago, who understands this strange half-life of widowhood, who makes me laugh sometimes in ways I'd forgotten I could. Nothing serious. Nothing like what Richard and I had, that was once in a lifetime, and I had my once. But companionship. Friendship. Maybe something more someday, if I'm ready. Richard would want that for me. His letter said so. If you've stuck with me through this whole story, thank you. Thank you for listening to an old widow rant about her pain, her daughter, her loss, her fight to remain whole. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world, tell me where you are in the comments. Tell me your story, if you have one. Tell me about the people who made you feel small, and how you found your way back to yourself. Because here's what I learned, grief is not weakness. Loss is not a character flaw. And demanding respect, even from people who are supposed to love you automatically, is not selfish. It's survival. I'm Stella. I'm 62 years old. I'm a widow. And I'm not ashamed of any of those things anymore. My daughter mocked me for being alone. But I'm not alone. I have Richard's love, still warm despite his death. I have my own strength, discovered in the breaking. I have a daughter who's learning, slowly, to be better. I have a future that's uncertain but mine to shape. And I have this story. My story. Not the tragic widow story Joan wanted to tell. But the real one. The complicated one. The painful, beautiful, still unfolding one. That's worth something. That's worth everything. So wherever you are, whatever you're grieving, whatever person has made you feel less than, you are enough. Your pain is valid. Your grief is not a flaw. And you deserve respect, dignity, and love, especially from the people who are supposed to give it freely. Don't let anyone make you small. Not even your own children. Not even the people you love most. Choose yourself. Richard told me that. And he was right. Choose yourself. Every single day. Choose yourself.